This episode of the e-commerce playbook is brought to you by Particle. Particle is a competitor intelligence platform trusted by leading brands like Skims, Hexclad, and Fashion Nova to uncover new revenue opportunities. Stay ahead of the curve with real-time competitor data and insights on market trends from over 10,000 brands. With Particle, you can explore ways to increase your market share, identify consistently growing products in your category, and understand how you compare to competitors. As a new partner to the podcast, Particle is offering an exclusive 2-week free trial and a 20% discount off your first month with the code CTC. Discover new ideas and market insights with Particle by visiting particle.com and using code CTC at checkout. Hey folks, welcome to the e-commerce playbook podcast. I'm your host, Richard Gaffin, Director of Digital Product Strategy here at Common Thread Collective. And I'm joined today, as we're recording this, it's July the 10th, although you'll be hearing it the following week, but we're just coming off a big July 4th weekend. Taylor, how you doing? How was your 4th?
Great. I live in a part of the world where fireworks are legal. And so the 4th of July is like a war zone, but which is like perfect excitement for a 10-year-old boy. So I got a couple of those. It was my dog's first 4th of July. So we were a little nervous because generally speaking, dogs get a little anxious with fireworks, but she's doing great. She's doing great.
Just totally fine with them. No barking.
Yeah. At first she was kind of curious, kind of ran after it, but then eventually she was just kind of sitting there watching them with us. So she did great.
Nice. So did you get any of like the full-blown mortar style? You drop it in and it goes up and explodes?
Just what we can buy from the stand to support the local Little League,
Gotcha.
Richard. That's all we're doing.
Of course.
Which that's a fascinating, like, if you ever want to go down a good rabbit hole, go down the rabbit hole of how those fireworks stands fund schools and local communities, and what a great business model this is, where the way they get massive distribution for all these fireworks stands is they go to local organizations like the Little League and say, hey, you work the stand, we'll supply the product, and we'll split the profit with you. And so they get distribution everywhere really, really fast at times where staffing would be so hard to do. So you have no labor costs because it's all volunteers from the local organizations. It's really a fascinating business model.
Wow.
So there's someone should do a deep dive into that on Twitter and put the thread together, because I think it's super interesting.
I guess, yeah, that's interesting. I guess I wouldn't have expected that level of innovation from the guys who came up with the little parachute man who comes out of the firework or whatever, but maybe I should have, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Fireworks have not evolved much except in the packaging, but other than that.
All right. Well, hey, here's a segue for you. Speaking of fireworks, over that July 4th weekend, another set of explosions went off in the e-commerce Twitter world when Taylor dropped his 25 hottest e-commerce takes over the July 4th weekend. Now, I would say maybe 25% of these ended up being actually hot in terms of the controversy that they engendered in the comment. But what I wanted to do is kind of go over some of them, because some of them are in some ways are sort of rehashing stuff that we've talked about on the podcast before. But I think there's some really interesting conversation to be found in some of the contradictions that people saw maybe in some of the list. So we're not going to read through the whole thing, obviously, because there's 25 of them. But I'm going to list off 2 different pairs. So we'll start with pair number 1, which is item 4, which is you're making 10x too few ads, which of course is something that we've said many, many times on this podcast. And then, well, actually, I guess these aren't necessarily contradictory with each other, but they're related, which is to say you're making 10x too few ads. And then number 6, that your company would make more money if your highest paid marketing team member was a video editor. So I think some of the pushback to 4 was this idea that making 10x too few ads, just building volume at the expense of actually creative strategy is a bad thing, which is obviously something that we already agree on. So maybe we don't necessarily need to go into that. But 6, this is one that I found interesting because I haven't heard this necessarily explicitly expressed from you before. This idea that you'd make more money rather, if your highest paid marketing team member was a video editor. Break that down for us. What does this mean?
So first of all, let me just say a few things.
Sure.
I only publish things like this on days where I have a bunch of time to argue with the internet. So the reason I published it on the 4th of July is because I was sitting around all day doing nothing. And so I could argue with the internet because I know that's inevitably where I'm going to end up. And my favorite response, if you haven't read these, there was a comment that Preston Rutherford wrote on my LinkedIn. He's one of the co-founders of Chubbies. And to give you some incentive to go check out this list, here's what he wrote. He wrote, to all the readers of this comment, please use these 25 points to drive the first half-day discussion at your brand's Q3 or second half executive leadership offsite, or every agency's second half kickoff with your clients. Objectively going through each one of these with genuine curiosity will likely be the difference between them making it to 2026 or going out of business. Easy for brands to scoff at or throw out the whole post if one of the 25 doesn't squarely apply to them or if they disagree with one of them. Even if they disagree with one or two or a few, rather than disregarding it, ask themselves, what in the general theme on this point that could apply to us? Let's discuss that idea and see what we need to do differently based on the idea. Brands don't necessarily need to follow all of them to a T, but need to honestly consider each one and make sure they either heed the point or have a damn good reason not to. I don't 100% agree with everyone, but I can make a small adaptation to the point, and when considering it that way, would have made better decisions for a long-term growth in contribution, free cash flow, and net income generated for the brand. Taylor, this is hot fire, the blue flame type. So that is my incentive for you to go read this. And I appreciated Preston. I wanted to just say thank you because that was one of the best LinkedIn comments I've ever gotten in my life. And I think it's really is what you're trying to do with a list like this is to force critical thinking. So I want to just say that this isn't about dogma. This isn't about an objective only way to do things. They're provocation. They're ideas to consider what we might mean. And so when we get to this next point, this is a setup to answer, do I think the video editor should be your highest paid person in your marketing department? Well, no, that's not true in my marketing department. And it's not true in any brand that I know's marketing department. But I think it is interesting to explore what would happen if it were true. And here's why I think it's a compelling idea is the point I'm really trying to make is that brands under-resource the primary place they make money. When I go into a business, yesterday I was in Utah for one of our customers. This is a 9-figure business that spends 8 figures plus on Meta a month. Okay? So the vast majority of their financial investment and revenue generation comes from this channel. Right now, internally, if they want to create a Meta ad, the media buyer can submit a ticket to the design organization, and it's 3 weeks to get that ad back.
Oh, wow.
Because that set of people is just doing a bunch of things. And that's not uncommon from big companies, right? That they have a design team that works on everything. They work on point of sale material for retail and emails and the display ads and billboards and magazine print ads. They do all these things. And the resource allocation doesn't match the value creation. And so what I'm saying with this tweet is that the primary asset inside of most organizations that creates revenue is a Meta ad. And so if you had somebody who was uniquely gifted and talented to produce amazing creative, and not just to think it up, and I have a growing belief that we need to merge the idea of strategy and doing as much as we can, and that doers should think strategically and strategic people should think about their capacity to do. So I don't just mean an editor that has to only receive direction. I mean an editor with vision, an editor with thoughtfulness, an editor with a deep understanding of your business. That's why you would pay them so much money. But if they could every day make amazing video ads for your Meta account, their impact inside of your organization would be really, really great. And that's the point I'm making is that if most of your money is spent in this channel, it creates most of your revenue, then you should resource it appropriately.
That's interesting. In my experience, like the biggest operational waste of time on the creative side is one person telling another person what to do, basically.
That's right.
Down to like specific details. And sometimes when you're working with a huge design organization like that, the only way to get out what you want to get out from them is to say, okay, at second 1, I want this to be on the screen. At second 2.
That's exactly right.
And if somebody can make those decisions, you can trust them to make those decisions for you and then create the thing that saves an incredible amount of time. And it's much less of a pain in the ass, of course.
And if I'm a video editor, like I actually have the hard skill, the technical skill, that if I can spend time to develop some of the soft creative ideation skill, like your value is just, it is immeasurable. Like your potential to create impact inside of organizations. If you can actually take a bunch of raw material and turn it into assets over and over and over and over again, that impact revenue, right? Because every ad has the potential to create immense amount of money. Now, each ad doesn't always work that way, but your potential value creation is really disparate relative to other employees. If all I make inside of the organization is, I don't know, point of sale material, your ability to alter The dynamics of sale are constrained. They're latent. The feedback cycles are slow. The POs don't work the same way. It's going to be really hard to assign you specific value. But if you make an ad that all of a sudden everybody can look in the ad account and go, it spent $500,000, like that value gets assigned to you
Yeah.
in a really unique way. And so it's a huge opportunity to really clearly impact the organization. And I just think resource allocation inside of these big companies doesn't match the actual value
Yeah.
creation very often.
If you're still struggling to keep up with your competitors using traditional methods, you will love Particle. Particle is a competitor intelligence platform trusted by leading brands like Skims, Hexclad, and Fashion Nova. Imagine having real-time competitor data and market trends from over 10,000 brands at your fingertips. With Particle, you can explore ways to increase your market share, identify consistently growing products, and understand how you stack up against the competition. Plus, you'll discover trending variants and uncover branding and pricing opportunities. Sound too good to be true? Just see for yourself with Particle's exclusive 2-week free trial and a 20% discount off your first month using the code CTC. Just go to particle.com and use that code at checkout or click the first link in the description below. Yeah, that makes sense. I think there's another little, you were sort of alluding to this, like a little lesson that designers are probably better at creative strategy than they think they are. And creative
Right.
strategists are probably going to be better designers than just a rando off the
That's right.
street. And like learning those two skills and bringing them together is just an incredible like combination of value. For
And
sure.
I'll give you an example. So Brittany Watterson is one of our growth strategy manager here at CTC, and she started making TikTok, and I follow her on TikTok, and she makes great content about marketing material. She knows how to put together a story. She knows how to edit the frames. She gets the medium, but at CTC, she doesn't do edit. She does strategy. She writes briefs. She directs people who make things. But then I see her create her own stuff, and I go, oh yeah, you could use CapCut. You would know what to do. You actually are intuitively able and these tools now are like, you need a few hours of focused intention to figure out the general principles of how to be good at them. Not to become world class at it. That obviously takes a lot more time, but they're really amazing how good these tools are nowadays to help you with this process.
Yeah. Okay. So one other thing in a point, maybe implicit in number 6, are we taking a stand here that video is superior to the still image when it comes to a meta ad? Or is that, I mean, a video editor could make a still and would be difficult or anything particular there?
I think to make a still great, it is more predicated on the product that is contained in the image and the surrounding context in which it's delivered. I think that the potential for a video to do more of the work on its own is higher, but I don't know that I believe that definitively. I think that you could replace the idea of editor in this frame with someone with editing and design skills even better. And generally speaking, what I notice about editors is a lot of it is font treatment. Like you're still stylizing stuff in a way that is all a video is a series of static frames, really, right? Like, so you still have to lay that out in a way that is consistent with graphic design elements. And so I think that those skills could translate pretty well, even if the tooling is slightly different.
Okay, so let's jump into another one here, or another potential contradiction. And so actually the one I was referencing before wasn't 4 and 6, it was 4 and 16. 4 being you are making 10x too few ads. 16 being test everything is the worst e-commerce advice that gets shared every day on Twitter. Although I think like if you've been a listener to the podcast, particularly for the last 2-3 weeks, you understand that there's not necessarily contradiction there. We're not talking about making small variation changes. So I just wanted to clarify that. But then the other one,
yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, the other one I wanted to point out was number 10, which is ASC tricked everyone into increasing spend on existing customers and remarketing. And 25, brands should probably loosen their exclusions on Meta. Your customers are forgetting about you. So talk about at least the relationship between those two things. And
yeah, I could see why that could be sounding like I'm saying two different things. When I say Meta tricked everybody, what I mean is it happened without them doing it intentionally. That's not a statement about whether it's good or bad. That's a statement about a thing that occurred. And I'll give you an example of how it occurred. In ASC, you set a percentage of your budget that you want to be spent on existing customers. So let's say I set it to 10%. Okay. What I'm saying to Meta is 10% of that budget that I set on a daily level can be set or can be spent on existing customers. And then I set my daily budget at $1,000. What you have said to Meta is you can spend up to $100 a day on existing customers. Now, if Meta that day, because you have a cost control on, spends only $500, you've still given them the ability to spend $100
Mhm.
of the 500, which is actually 20% of the budget. So one, that's confusing. Right away, that wasn't intuitive to me when I understood it, and I've seen a lot of people misinterpret that as just a clever way to potentially spend more money on existing customers. Two, the fact that they gave you that slider prompted in people's minds of like, oh, how much of my budget should go to existing customers? And what I noticed is like no one really knew what to put. So they all just put like, I don't know, 10 to 20%, 10%, 5%. Versus historically, we all were like really rigorous about exclusions in ways that I think is really different. So it just prompted a behavior, I think, that got everybody to go like, oh, I don't know. Yeah, I guess we want some signal in there, or maybe 95% new customers feels pretty good. And versus it was all zero in many cases before. No, I'm speaking in some generalities here that there's lots of specific edge cases, but I think that, and then there's just the general idea that ASC as a product experientially moved further down the funnel in an attempt to produce better performance. That's an anecdote that I've heard that a lot of people have experienced that idea.
Mhm.
We have some data that shows that over the first half of the year, there's been a greater increase in the growth of existing customer revenue than new customer revenue across brands on e-commerce that would potentially validate that idea, but I don't have any specific confirmation that that's true, but that's something that I hear from a lot of people about that product.
Yeah. Okay, so there's
So then the idea of loosening exclusions though, sorry, to
yeah.
get to the second part, I actually think this might be a good thing. Is what I have seen is that, especially in our cohort of customers, which are 8-figure brands, is that they have matured and grown their customer file to such a size that they have this large group of lapsed customers, meaning customers that haven't bought from them in a year,
Mhm.
in 8 months, in 9 months, are not responding to your emails and really need to be remessaged and resold on the brand. And in addition, you've likely launched so many new products that it's time to let them know. And one of the things that happens, like, so again, this is fresh in my mind because I was with a customer yesterday, is they started in one category, then they expanded into a disparate category, and the overlap between purchasers of those two product categories is not very high.
Hmm.
So functionally, they're different customers.
Yeah.
But at the campaign level, they were excluding all customers. Well, that doesn't make any sense. If you have, let's just make up a brand. Let's use Ridge as an example. And you were selling wallets and then you sell suitcases, and the wallet customers don't buy suitcases and the suitcase customers don't buy wallets. Why would you exclude the wallet purchasers from the suitcase ads?
Mhm.
Right. And so I think that when we think about exclusions, what you're really trying to do is to avoid non-incremental ad attribution. Okay. Well, the way to do that is probably more focused on the kind of optimization that you use. So click optimization reduces non-incremental sales. And second is to reduce the overlap where email and SMS would have generated the purchase anyways, which is likely in the period of active customers, where usually in the first, let's say 75 days, where email and SMS is still likely to pick them up with new announcements. So I think by narrowing the range of exclusions, avoiding exclusions between product categories, you can get a better definition and better opportunity to increase the signal to Meta about who's buying and drive incremental contribution,
Mhm.
not just of the new customer variety.
Gotcha. So in a sense, it's less about loosening exclusions and more about being more specific with them, or more granular or detailed in terms of
Yeah, that's
how
right.
you're
So
doing that.
when I say loosening, what I mean is like they were too tight before. You had everybody excluded.
Right.
And now I want you to let some people back in.
Yeah.
So I can see how that could be sort of thought of as the opposite. We need to tighten the exclusions, meaning you have everybody excluded and we need to shrink the pool. What I mean is we need to like
Gotcha.
bring some customers back into seeing your ads. More people need to see your ads. Some of the customers that you already have, the idea that you have someone's email address and that they've seen your product once doesn't really mean they're yours. You really have to actively sell them over and over and over again.
Mhm. Yeah, there's an interesting, like I feel like we don't talk much about the lapsed customer portion of the kind of shrinking the sponge conversation, I guess. Like there's your existing customers and there's your new customers. But then particularly like you're pointing out, as you grow, if that lapsed customer file becomes massive, then all of a sudden, like, that's a bunch of warm leads that are just kind of leaving on the table.
That's right. And what happens all the time is that we'll reintroduce that lapsed customer base, and you'll get like a spike in revenue. Now, it doesn't last very long because that group isn't enormous. You'll saturate it fairly quickly. The marginal frontier on it's pretty small. But if you set it that at a small continual budget, you'll avoid creating that lapse at the same rate. So you'll activate more customers more often on a persistent basis, but it will produce usually for a lot of you like a meaningful initial uptick in performance.
Okay, so let's call out a couple others here. One that we talked about a little bit before we hit record here that I thought was interesting was number 12. Our kids will laugh at the idea of buying things from a brand's website. Now, obviously, that was maybe a little bit hyperbolized, but maybe unpack that a little bit. Like, really?
Yeah. So I think that what happens with purchasing is it, like evolution, just moves closer and closer to the point of discovery.
Hmm.
I think a website was a step in this direction. It's that the internet actually brought the purchase of something closer to the customer from the retail store.
Hmm.
So previously, if I was watching a TV ad, the closest I could get to the transaction was to get up, get in my car, drive to the store and buy it. A website brought it closer to where I could go from seeing it on TV to looking at it on my computer or on my phone and making the purchase initially. I just think the end result is that the inevitability is the transaction layer moves all the way right to the point of discovery.
Mhm.
So where does discovery happen? It happens in content. So think about that as social commerce. You're on TikTok, you're on Meta, you see something and you can instantly purchase it with one click inside of Meta or inside of TikTok. We already see that happening. I think that's going to continue to grow. YouTube's going to launch that. Everything's going to launch that, right? I think you're going to see commerce layers on top of video content,
Mhm.
like movies and TV shows and reality TV, where you're like, oh, those are cool shoes, click, purchase. You saw bits of this already with Amazon as the content provider for Monday Night Football,
Hmm.
and how they did a Black Friday TV show, and there was all this like transaction element inside of the content. I think that happens. I think I think AR and glasses and things like that are all places where in the real world, if I'm out and I'm like, hey, that elephant hat that Richard's got on, that thing's pretty dang cool. And I can say to my glasses or my Siri, hey, send me that elephant hat. I don't care where it came, where the transaction occurs on a website, on Amazon, or whatever. Like, I think that level of interaction is also going to happen. So part of this is I watch my kids. If my kids want things, that like it's not part of their idea that they would go to a website. The places that they think purchase happens is they go to Amazon. So one is like they know that Amazon brings things to their house every single day,
Mhm.
like instantaneously. So the first place they would look to buy anything, no matter what the object is Amazon. And then second is they like talk to Siri, like in a way that or not Siri, Alexa,
Hmm.
in a way that is so foreign to me. But she is the primary source of everything. And so I just see these like the sense that the idea of pulling out a device, typing something into a browser, navigating through multiple steps of clicks where I fill out my information, it's all too cumbersome.
Mhm.
As crazy as that sounds, it's really slow and doesn't actually deliver on the instantaneous potential that commerce has in the world of discovery.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I wonder how do you think that principle of evolution would apply to products that have like a longer consideration period? Because I could see that also happening where there's like a consistent something that reminds you to go back and purchase or to explore further or whatever. But like, how do you see that playing out?
I think that depends on where we get knowledge from.
Mhm.
So right now, if you think about how would I do that now, I would Google something,
Right.
right? Like, so if you told me, oh, I've got this really cool new watch, I might Google the brand, read some reviews, watch some videos. And I wonder if there's not an intermediary source of truth, like whether that's my personal AI assistant, Jenny, that I created. And I just say, Jenny, tell me a little bit about product X. And she sources all the reviews and information and says, yeah, Taylor, you've got this thing that's like it. And remember when you did that? And I actually saw that Reggie, your friend, has one. So I've texted him about it and I got you a response back and did it like in a way that I could imagine that how I would source information about an object right now. Again, our millennial brain, we Google it. But that's gonna like I just think that idea, the 13 blue links as the way to get to truth is not how my kids source truth. Like, I just don't think that the next generation is going to source truth the same way we did. I
Yeah.
don't think that's consistent across any generation.
Yeah.
So I just think that it's going to happen in a very different way.
Fascinating. Well, speaking of maybe the generational divide, that's an interesting, not necessarily contradiction, but counterpoint to this is to 12 is number 15, which is that retail is so much bigger than online that it is hard to actually conceptualize the delta. So unpack that a little bit and maybe explain how it interacts with the point you just made in 12.
So right now, how much purchase volume happens at physical retail as a percentage of all the transactions in the world, this is well known. It's like 85%, right? Like 15 to 16% of transactions happen online. 84% or so happens at retail. That is such a big number that I think when I say it's hard to conceptualize is that I watch a lot of brands that are trying to grow a lot. They're mid 8 figures and they're like, how do I get 50% more growth? And you realize like, oh, you haven't even touched the biggest portion of the market that still exists for your product. And this is like more true in certain categories. We've used native deodorant as an example before on this podcast, a longtime customer of ours. Like the amount of deodorant bought at grocery versus online is just so massively different that the idea of where your growth would come from if you were a deodorant brand, if the answer isn't Walmart and Target and Albertsons and all of those things, then like you have so much more potential there than you do online and the rate at which people buy deodorant online. Now, again, that's different strokes for different categories, but you got to think like automotive is fascinating where Tesla is like one of the only companies that really sells direct to consumer cars. Like all the other cars in the world are bought at physical locations. And so I think you're right in that like there's this bridge between present state and future reality. And today I'm not telling people not to make a website. If I'm starting a brand, I'm building a website, like for sure. All of the transactions happen on the website. But the future I could imagine something different. And that's why I said our kids, that's like beckoning to the next generation more than it is a present day claim. And the same thing is true for retail. Today, retail is most of the purchases still. And who knows what the future holds, but today that's still the case. And I think a lot of brands, again, so much of what I think about is where does future value come from? Where do you as a business go capture future value? And I watch people just like grinding this like meta ad engine, just try and squeak out 13% more growth. And it's like, wow, maybe there's other channels of massive more opportunity for you as a business. Not that those things are simple or without their own complexities, but
yeah, I know this is a conversation before, but just because we're talking about it, because we're on record as sort of giving warnings about channel expansion or distribution channel expansion. What do you think the inflection point is? I know we've gone over this before. What's the inflection point where it's like, okay, now it's time to start really, really thinking about retail?
When you can be responsible for the sell-through in a location. When your unaided brand awareness is such that you have created enough to make sure that you're successful at it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
When we did this, I'll give you the approach that we took when we were at Kalo was like, okay, we mapped out the future of retail growth. And we said, okay, what stores are they going to come from? And we had 3 sort of primary retailers that we looked at. One was a sporting goods store called Academy. One was Home Depot or Lowe's, like the home improvement category. And the third was, I think it was like Dick's Sporting Goods or another sporting goods, or maybe it was fitness. Maybe it was like 24-hour fitness. I don't know, but but I want to focus on the one Academy. And so we said, okay, Academy is a big sports retailer in the South, like Texas. And what we said was, okay, if we're going to be successful in Academy, then we need all of Academy's customers to know who Kalo is. And so we said, all right, where are their locations? Okay, Texas. All right. Before we go to Academy, we're going to do work to sell Kalo into those customers, in those demographics, in those regions, such that the way we sold into Academy is back in the day, there used to be this, you used to be able to look at your audience insights in Meta and see who your customers were. And one of the categories was like favorite products. And so we took one of our internal organizational goals was to have Academy's audience insights, their demographic customers, favorite products be Kalo that we could use to sell into Academy and say, your customers already are a customer. We will win here if you put us into your stores. And so we felt responsible for the actual sale of the store. I think a lot of times people go, oh, the retailer is going to help me reach new customers. No, they're not. They're going to put you on the shelf. And then like, maybe you'll be in a flyer someday, but like you have to make the product move. And so I think the sequencing has to be when you have the capacity and dollars to support the sell-through and distribution in a specific region, which usually means you start small and expand out as you have success.
Makes sense. Okay, cool. Any other no, sorry, any other one of these points that you want to call out specifically?
Let's see. I think the one about 10x your value inside of an organization.
Yeah. This is
I
interesting.
think
Well, let's actually
one
let
of the
me
things.
read it off just for the folks here. So number 18 is if you want to instantly 10x your value inside your organization, become the best in the company at Excel. Parentheses, it would probably only take you 60 days of focused learning.
So I think there are very few pieces of software that have been pervasive throughout multiple decades. And it's very risky to become great at an individual software because that could disappear in relevance really fast. Like if you're the best at Canva, like it's probably useful today, but in, I don't know, 2 years, maybe there's something way better and you're obsolete. Excel is the most persistent, consistently used piece of software in every organization in the world. And so it makes you able to transfer skill across multiple business types, models, sizes, contexts, like enterprise level customers, the biggest businesses in the world and startups both use this piece of software constantly.
Mm.
And what I've noticed is most people are not very good at it.
Yeah.
And when you're good at it, it feels like wizardry. It's like magic that you can take and create a pivot table and know how to do a VLOOKUP and take tasks that take people countless hours and make them happen really quickly. You'll get constant requests from people to help them. You'll become known inside the organization and you will be asked to do things and create visuals and information for the most important parts of the organization. And when I say it's 60 days, I mean, like if you took 2 like high-end econ or Excel courses from Udemy or any other software, like, and you were really focused on it, it's actually pretty quick. And so I think that like the potential payoff, if I was looking for a way to grow inside of an organization and develop more corporate reputation and capacity, it's the first thing I would do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've been obsessed with Google Sheets really for the last couple of years as I've built some tools for admission and that kind of thing. And you're right, the learning a new formula that does something incredible is like not only is it a really cool feeling, but like understanding the thing about Excel and Sheets is that if you ask yourself the question, I wonder if this can do X, the answer is almost always yes, it can. There is a way to get to it. And that's just a quality that most tools that we use on a day-to-day basis do not have, but Excel can do everything.
That's right.
Incredible.
That's right. Its flexibility is truly remarkable. And I think, again, it's just, you have a skill for life that's applicable in so many places. And again, Richard, your job is creative, who's in charge of a community group, leads a podcast, and you use Excel all the time.
All the time.
Like
yeah.
I'm the CEO. I use Excel all the time. Like it's pervasive in media buyers use Excel all the time. Like it just doesn't matter. Everybody uses it. And so being excellent at it is just such an obvious upskill that I think is useful.
Yeah. All right. So I'll leave you with the final question here because I think it's interesting. So these 25 takes are meant to be hot takes. But of course, even though it got a ton of engagement in terms of likes and whatever and responses, there wasn't a lot of disagreement, which may have been disappointing to somebody who likes to argue. But what do you think it says, or how many of these points do people agree with a year ago or 2 years ago?
Well, I think I've cultivated an audience.
Yeah, sure.
that follows me specifically. I think there is a lot more disagreement probably in text messages and Slack threads about what an idiot I am probably than publicly. But I do think that we have been right about this, about the shift of focus towards profitability. And it's becoming normative now to say things like you probably have too many people or your OpEx should be leaner or, those kinds of things. I think people are aware of it. And so it is, I think, getting closer to time. And I'm starting to tease a thing. Like you may have seen some things that I've been putting out about IPOs and the brands that I think are coming to IPO is that I think that what's been happening is we've been going through a cleansing as an industry, which is we're paying for the sins of the past, which was all the consumer brands that went public weren't actually that good at businesses. Their stocks are all down 90%. There was a bunch of predatory lenders that gave out money that they couldn't afford. Everybody's going bankrupt. The venture capital money all fled, and we're having to create health and cleanse ourselves of all of that. On the other side of that, though, we can prove that consumer can be a great business model. And I think there's some brands that have done it And it's going to start to prove again that this is an opportunity where growth capital can come and can be successful, and that there is a period on the end of this where people are going to want to go, I want to be a part of that business because it's producing great cash and it's growing year over year. And it's a business I'd be proud to be a part of. And I think that that's roadmap is there, and it's going to start to be elevated as some of these things reset the top of the market, have some successful IPOs, have some big wins on transactions from this group of customers that have gone through this and are now really good businesses.
There you go. Well, folks, maybe that's the hottest take of all, is that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and things are going to look up and get stronger as we move on through the year. But all right, folks. Well, thanks for listening. That'll do it for us for this week. Take care, everyone. We'll talk to you next week.